The mountains stood silent, their jagged peaks cutting into the sky like the teeth of some ancient beast. Beneath their shadow, the land was a desolate wasteland, scarred by wars long forgotten. This was no ordinary planet, once teeming with life. Now it was an abandoned ruin, a reminder of the universe's ever-changing nature. Few creatures lived here anymore. Most avoided the land entirely, knowing that something dark lingered beneath the surface. Viraloth was one of those rare beings who roamed the forgotten corners of the galaxy. An ancient dragon with scales as dark as the night sky. Unlike other dragons, who were known for their wisdom, magic, and desire for solitude, Viraloth had grown used to the silence of the planet's empty landscapes. Its massive wings beat the air with ease, each stroke carrying the creature across endless valleys and cliffs that no other being dared to explore. Today, however, was different. Viraloth had flown over the familiar hills and peaks when it noticed something unusual below. A trail of smoke rose into the air, far off in the distance. It was thin and weak, as though something had crashed into the barren earth. The dragon's curiosity piqued. Viraloth altered its course and flew toward the source of the smoke. As it drew closer, the sight became clear. A wreck. A ship, or at least the remains of one, lay scattered across the ground. The ship had clearly been destroyed by some catastrophic force. Pieces of metal were twisted and burned, half sunk into the ground like a broken shell. The air smelled of scorched metal and ozone. Viraloth circled above, scanning the wreckage. It could sense nothing alive. The crash had been violent, and surely any survivors would have perished. But something called to the dragon, a strange feeling of unease that prickled its senses. There was still something, or someone, out there. Landing carefully, Viraloth's claws dug into the cracked earth as it stepped closer to the wreck. The dragon's massive head lowered, eyes scanning the wreckage for any signs of life. The heat from the burnt ship lingered in the air, but Viraloth was patient. A faint sound broke through the silence. A cry. It was small, high-pitched, and unmistakable. The dragon's head shot up, ears twitching. The sound came again. It was a baby's cry. Confusion filled Viraloth's mind. No one should have survived this crash, let alone a child. With a careful step, Viraloth approached the wreck. There, hidden among the twisted metal and debris, lay an infant. Its small form, swaddled in tattered remnants of clothing, seemed impossibly fragile. It was a human child, no older than a few months, lying alone among the destruction. The dragon's massive eyes widened in disbelief. It leaned closer, its long snout hovering above the child. The baby's eyes fluttered open, locking onto Viraloth's. They were bright, curious, and completely unafraid. It was as if the child sensed no danger, not even in the presence of such a mighty creature. A surge of something Viraloth had never felt before washed over it, something akin to protectiveness. The dragon had seen many things in its long life: wars, destruction, and death, but this child was different. It was small, vulnerable, and utterly alone in a place where even the most powerful beings would fear to tread. Viraloth carefully nudged the baby with its snout, its large, warm breath brushing against the child's skin. The baby let out another cry, louder this time, its tiny hands reaching out as if seeking comfort. The dragon, unsure of what to do, hesitated for a moment. It had never cared for anything before, and certainly not a human infant. But something in the dragon's ancient heart stirred. It knew that this child could not survive alone here, not in the vast emptiness of the wasteland. The ship was beyond repair, and there was no sign of any other survivors. Viraloth's instincts kicked in. Despite all its centuries of solitude, the dragon felt a bond with this child, a strange pull that was impossible to ignore. With careful movements, Viraloth gently scooped the infant into its claws, cradling the child against its chest. The dragon's warmth seemed to comfort the baby, and the cries slowly quieted, replaced by soft whimpers as the child looked up at Viraloth with wide, trusting eyes. "Why are you crying?" Viraloth mused in a low rumble, though it knew the child couldn't understand. It had never spoken to anything like this before. The dragon didn't know what drove it to stay with the infant. It had no experience caring for others, especially not something as fragile as a human child. But for some reason, Virloth felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. It was the dragon's duty to protect the child now, to ensure its survival. The dragon carried the infant through the desolate landscape, its powerful wings making short work of the journey. The land seemed even more hostile than before, with strange creatures lurking just beyond the horizon. But none dared approach the dragon. Virloth was a creature of legend, feared and respected by all who knew of it. As the day faded and the stars began to emerge in the sky, Virloth found a small cave to shelter in. Carefully, the dragon set the baby down on a bed of soft moss it had gathered. Virloth watched over the child, its golden eyes flickering in the dark. The child was exhausted, its small chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. For the first time in ages, Virloth felt something akin to peace. The cave was warm and safe, and the child was secure. It had made a choice. The dragon would remain here. It would guard this fragile, innocent life. As the night stretched on, Virloth stayed close, watching over the child with a watchful gaze. The dragon had never cared about anything before, but now, it couldn't help but feel connected to this small, helpless creature. Tomorrow, it would find food and water for the child. Tomorrow, it would begin to learn what it meant to be a protector. And so, in the quiet of the cave, under the light of the distant stars, the dragon and the human infant began their strange journey together. Days passed, and the silence of the mountain world was broken only by the soft, rhythmic sound of Virloth's breathing and the faint cries of the infant. The dragon had never known companionship, let alone the responsibility of caring for another being. But since the day it found the child, something inside Virloth had shifted. No longer was it simply a solitary creature of the ancient mountains. It had become a protector. Virloth's days were spent hunting the vast lands around the cave. Its wings sliced through the air, carrying it swiftly over rocky plains and dense forests. The dragon would search for the largest game, deer-like creatures that roamed in herds. Massive beasts with thick hides that would provide enough meat for both Virloth and the child. Each time the dragon returned, the infant's wide eyes would be waiting, full of curiosity. The child had grown stronger each day, its cries less frequent, replaced by cooing sounds as it began to explore the world around it. Virloth had begun to notice small changes in the child. It was learning to lift its tiny arms, to grasp at things, and even to mimic sounds that the dragon made. For a creature like Virloth, this was new and unfamiliar. It was used to being feared and respected, not cared for. But every time the child smiled or cooed at it, Virloth felt a deep warmth spread through its chest. It didn't know why, but it was as if the dragon was no longer alone. In the presence of the child, Virloth felt a connection, something it had never experienced before. As the weeks went by, the bond between the two deepened. Virloth would spend hours beside the child, watching it play with small rocks or the leaves that drifted into the cave. The dragon's sharp, intelligent eyes would follow every movement, ensuring nothing dangerous would get too close. The mountain world was full of dangers, but Virloth's presence kept them at bay. One day, as Virloth was out hunting, it noticed something strange on the horizon. A small group of creatures, large, aggressive, and with sharp teeth, were moving through the valley below. These were the kind of creatures that the dragons had once ruled over, but now, it seemed they were growing bolder. They had learned to hunt in packs, and they were heading straight for the cave. Virloth's heart raced. It could feel the urgency of the situation. The infant was alone, helpless, and unable to defend itself. The thought of leaving it unprotected caused a strange tightness in the dragon's chest, an unfamiliar feeling of panic. With a powerful flap of its wings, Virloth surged into the sky, its massive body cutting through the air like a blade. The creatures had reached the cave by the time the dragon arrived. They were circling around, sniffing the air, their eyes gleaming with hunger. Virloth roared, a sound so deep and thunderous that it shook the mountains. The creatures froze, fear flashing in their eyes as they recognized the dragon. But they were desperate, driven by hunger. They didn't retreat. Instead, they lunged at the cave, claws slashing and fangs bared. The baby's cries echoed through the air, cutting through the tension like a knife. With a great, Furious roar, Virloth swooped down, its talons slicing through the air with deadly precision. It struck the first creature with a force that sent it sprawling across the ground, its body crumpling under the dragon's power. Another lunged at the dragon's side, but Virloth twisted midair, dodging the attack and slamming its tail into the creature's chest. It collapsed with a sickening crunch. The remaining creatures hesitated, but Virloth was relentless. With a powerful beat of its wings, the dragon sent a gust of wind so forceful it knocked them off their feet. The beasts scrambled to regain their footing, but they were no match for the sheer might of the dragon. One by one, they fled, retreating into the distance, their primal fear too great to challenge the ancient creature. The cave fell silent again, but Virloth's heart raced. It looked down at the small bundle of life that had once again brought it into action. The infant was crying, its little hands reaching out in fear. Virloth approached slowly, its giant, clawed feet making no sound as it moved toward the child. The dragon's warm breath swept over the baby as it gently picked it up and cradled it close to its chest. The infant's cries softened as it felt the warmth of the dragon's body. Virloth carefully laid the child back down on its bed of moss and leaves, watching it as it slowly calmed down. It seemed as if the child could sense that the danger had passed. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of soft breathing and the crackling of a small fire Virloth had started earlier that night. As the stars glittered in the sky above, the dragon remained beside the child, its glowing eyes never leaving its tiny companion. There was no more fear, no more doubt in Virloth's heart. The dragon was no longer just guarding a helpless infant, it was bonded to the child, its protector, its responsibility. As the days continued to pass, Virloth began to notice something even more remarkable. The child was growing. The baby, once unable to do more than cry and wave its arms in frustration, was now attempting to crawl. Its tiny hands would grip at Virloth's scales, tugging gently at them as it made slow progress on the ground. The dragon, though still unsure of how to help, always stayed nearby, its sharp eyes watching with deep curiosity. One morning, Virloth had returned from a hunt to find the child sitting up on its own, propped against a pile of soft moss. The dragon paused in its tracks, surprised at how quickly the infant had grown. The child looked up at Virloth with a toothless grin, its eyes sparkling with excitement. It reached out its tiny hands toward the dragon, as if inviting it to come closer. For a brief moment, Virloth hesitated. It was still uncertain about how to interact with the child. What could it possibly give this tiny, fragile creature? What did it know of nurturing? But then, as if guided by instinct, the dragon slowly lowered its head, bringing its face close to the child. It allowed the baby to touch its scales, the warmth of Virloth's body soothing the child in a way that no other being could. The child giggled, a sound that made Virloth's heart swell. In that moment, something deep inside the dragon shifted again. It understood now that this child was not just a responsibility, it was a new purpose. Virloth could feel the bond growing stronger each day. The child was no longer just a helpless infant. It was becoming something more. And in turn, Virloth was becoming more than just a solitary dragon. It was learning to care, to protect, to guide. The dragon had discovered something precious, a new purpose that went beyond its ancient, solitary existence. As the sun began to set on the horizon, Virloth stayed by the child's side, watching as the infant continued to explore its new world. The days ahead would be full of challenges, but Virloth was ready. The dragon had no idea what the future held for them, but one thing was certain: it would never leave the child's side. Virloth's life had changed in ways it never imagined possible. The dragon had lived for centuries, roaming the peaks of its mountain home, and had always been content in its solitude. But now, everything was different. The child, this small human, had become the center of its world. Virloth had come to care for the infant in a way it had never thought possible. The child was no longer just something to protect. It was a part of the dragon's life, something Virloth had come to cherish. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the bond between the dragon and the child only grew stronger. The infant had started to crawl, its tiny hands reaching out for Viriloth's scales. Its baby noises turning into small, joyful sounds as it explored the cave and its surroundings. The dragon watched over it every moment, its sharp eyes constantly alert for any danger that might come their way. Though the child was still small and helpless, it was growing stronger. But despite the peaceful routine, a sense of unease gnawed at the dragon. Viriloth could feel the world around them changing. The once quiet, desolate mountains were no longer as peaceful. The winds had become unpredictable, and the skies had darkened with strange clouds. The ground shook beneath the dragon's powerful feet at odd times, sending tremors through the cave. Viriloth had learned to trust its instincts over its long life. The feeling in the air, this unnatural disturbance, made it uneasy. Something was wrong. The dragon couldn't shake the feeling that danger was coming, not just for itself, but for the child. One morning, the ground trembled more violently than before. A rumble deep in the earth shook the cave as Viriloth stood, staring out into the distance. The dragon's wings rustled, and it lifted its head high, listening carefully. There was a hum in the air, an energy the dragon had not felt in ages. It was not a natural storm, nor was it the usual tremor from the shifting mountains. This was something different, something unnatural. Viriloth's golden eyes narrowed. There was no time to waste. The child was still asleep, lying peacefully on its bed of soft moss. Viriloth glanced down at the infant, a wave of protectiveness sweeping over it. The child had grown so much in the last few weeks, starting to say simple sounds. Its eyes bright with curiosity. It had become stronger, more aware of the world around it. But it was still so vulnerable. The dragon turned and moved towards the entrance of the cave, its massive form moving silently through the shadows. The air was thick with tension. The hum grew louder as Viriloth made its way outside. The source of the disturbance was coming closer, high above. The dragon's sharp eyes caught sight of something unusual in the sky. Several ships, dark and sleek, flew in formation, cutting through the clouds. They were not from this planet. Viriloth could tell. The ships were advanced, their designs unfamiliar and sleek. The dragon's heart beat faster as it realized what was happening. The ships were heading toward the crash site. Viriloth's mind raced. The ships were coming for the child. It had no other explanation. These ships were from another world, a world that knew about humans, perhaps even the child itself. The dragon's protective instincts flared. There was no way Viriloth would allow these unknown forces to take the infant. Not now. Not after everything it had done to protect it. The dragon turned back toward the cave. The child was still safe inside, but the danger was coming closer. The ships were approaching fast, and they would soon land. Viriloth had to act quickly. It needed help. Viriloth's mind flicked back to the humanoid beings it had encountered months before. They had been in hiding, living in the deep caverns beneath the surface. The dragon had sensed that they had knowledge of the planet's secrets, and perhaps they could help. Perhaps they were the only ones who could help. Without wasting another moment, Viriloth spread its wings and took flight. The winds whipped around it as it soared through the sky, its powerful wings beating with determination. The dragon flew as fast as it could, navigating the mountain ranges and deep valleys. Its sharp eyes scanned the landscape below, searching for the entrance to the hidden caverns. The journey was long, and the sky seemed to grow darker with every passing minute. But Viriloth pressed on, driven by a singular purpose: to protect the child. The ships in the sky were a threat that it could not face alone. It needed allies. After what felt like hours, Viriloth finally reached the entrance to the caverns. It was hidden beneath an overhang of rocks, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Viriloth landed in front of the entrance, its claws scraping the stone as it touched down. The air inside the cavern was cool, and the walls were covered in strange, glowing runes that pulsed faintly in the dim light. The humanoid being Zerander and the others had once lived here, long ago, before they had retreated underground. They had knowledge of the planet's ancient technology, and perhaps even the key to stopping whatever threat had come for the child. Viriloth knew that they were the only hope. The dragon roared, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the cavern. Moments later, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Zerander, a humanoid with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, stood in front of the dragon. He had known Virilov's rival long before the roar had reached his ears. "You've returned," Arender said quietly, his voice calm but filled with curiosity. "What brings you here, old friend?" Virilov's gaze was fixed on the humanoid, its golden eyes filled with urgency. The child was in danger. The ships in the sky were not from this planet. They were coming for it. Arender's expression changed as he saw the dragon's distress. "The child," he said softly. "You found it, didn't you?" The dragon nodded, its wings twitching in agitation. Arender looked around, as though considering the situation. "I feared this day would come. The human child. It is a symbol, a key to something greater. They must have sensed it. They're coming for it," Virilov growled, the words nearly lost in its throat. "We need to stop them." Arender nodded slowly. "You are right. The time has come to act. The child is not just a survivor. It is the last hope of the human race. We must keep it safe." The humanoid turned and gestured for Virilov to follow. Together, they moved deeper into the caverns, past ancient machines and forgotten ruins. Arender explained that the ships were likely part of an old galactic faction one that had been hunting the remnants of humanity for centuries. The child, Arender believed, carried the bloodline of the ancient humans, whose legacy had been all but erased. "They found it," Arender muttered. "They will not stop until they have the child." Virilov growled again, its wings spreading as it felt a new surge of protectiveness. "We will not let them take it." Arender led the dragon to a hidden chamber deep within the caverns. Here, long-forgotten technology hummed with life, and the walls were lined with maps of distant star systems. Arender turned to the dragon, his expression serious. "We need to prepare. The child's survival depends on it." Virilov nodded, its eyes locked onto Arender's. The next steps would be crucial. Together, they would ensure the child's safety no matter the cost. Virilov's wings beat steadily as it followed Arender through the ancient caverns. The air was thick with the scent of stone and age, a reminder of how long the humanoid race had hidden beneath the surface. It had been decades, maybe even centuries, since they had last interacted with the outside world. Now, they were about to step into a new chapter, one where the fate of the human child rested in their hands. The journey to the heart of the cavern system was long and treacherous, winding through narrow tunnels, down steep slopes, and past crumbling walls lined with strange symbols. Virilov's massive form moved with surprising grace, its sharp eyes scanning the dark corridors for any signs of danger. Despite the apparent safety of the caverns, the dragon could feel the weight of the tension in the air. The ships in the sky were getting closer, and the child's future felt uncertain. Teetering on the edge of an unknown fate, Arender, who had led the way, was unusually quiet, his mind clearly focused on the task at hand. He had been expecting this day for many years, but it was clear that even he wasn't entirely sure what to do next. As they walked, Virilov could hear the soft clink of Arender's boots on the stone floor, a sound that echoed eerily through the empty tunnels. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the core of the caverns, a large, open space that stretched out in all directions. The walls were lined with intricate patterns, glowing faintly with a bluish light, and in the center stood a massive structure made of ancient, polished stone. Virilov paused for a moment, taking in the sight. It was unlike anything the dragon had ever seen. The architecture seemed both alien and familiar, as if it had been built by beings who had once shared the same universe, but had long since disappeared. "This is the heart of our civilization," Arender said, his voice low and reverent. "This is where we hid when the Great War began, and this is where the child must go." Virilov's eyes narrowed. The child had to go here. Why? Arender had explained some of the history before, but it seemed like there was still much more to learn. The dragon turned its attention to the structure, wondering what kind of power it held. "We've kept it hidden," Arender continued, "because the knowledge inside it is dangerous. It has the power to destroy or to rebuild. We don't know which." Virilov let out a low growl, its golden eyes flashing. "Destroy or rebuild? What could be so important that it had to be locked away for so long?" Arender seemed to read the dragon's thoughts. "The child holds the key. You see, the human race was once powerful, not just because of their numbers, but because of their technology. Long before the war that shattered their civilization, humans discovered a way to tap into the deepest forces of the universe. They learned to manipulate time and space itself to bend the very fabric of reality. And the child, this infant you've been protecting, is the last of their bloodline. Virloth blinked. The child was the last of the human race's bloodline? That meant the dragon had not been protecting just any child, but the very key to humanity's future. Its importance was far greater than the dragon had ever realized. But why? Virloth rumbled. Why didn't you tell me this before? Why was it kept a secret? Arender's expression darkened. Because it was too dangerous. The power that the humans once held was too great for anyone to control. They were not meant to have such power. The child, it must be protected, yes, but it must also be kept from falling into the wrong hands. The dragon felt the weight of Arender's words. The child was not just a symbol of hope, it was a weapon, a living key to a power beyond imagination. And if the wrong people, if the ships in the sky got their hands on it, everything could be destroyed. We must keep moving, Arender said, his voice urgent. The child cannot stay in the open for long. We need to reach the chamber where the technology that could save humanity lies. With that, Arender led Virloth to a smaller chamber at the back of the large space. Inside, a strange device sat at the center, encased in what appeared to be a crystalline shell. The walls around it were lined with intricate controls and glowing symbols, some of which flickered with faint light as if the machine were awakening from a long slumber. This is it, Arender said softly, the heart of humanity's lost knowledge. And now, it belongs to the child. Virloth stepped forward, its large body blocking much of the light as it peered down at the machine. There was something undeniably ancient about it, but also something strangely alive. The dragon's sharp eyes narrowed as it studied the device. It was clear that the child was somehow tied to this structure, that the power of the device was connected to its very existence. Arender placed a hand on the surface of the crystal shell, and the symbols around the room flickered to life, brighter than before. A hum filled the air, resonating deep within the dragon's bones. Virloth felt the familiar sense of power, the energy of the machine swirling around it like a storm waiting to break. The child, now held in the crook of Virloth's arm, began to stir, its tiny hands reaching up toward the machine. It let out a soft coo, a noise of pure curiosity, as it gazed at the glowing symbols. The child is responding, Arender said, his voice filled with awe. It's as though the machine recognizes the child's presence. But we still don't understand how or why. Virloth shifted the infant in its arms, the dragon's mind racing. The child was the key to unlocking the mystery of this ancient technology. And yet, even Arender, the last of the humanoid race, didn't fully understand how it worked. The machine hummed louder, the symbols now glowing brighter, casting strange shadows across the chamber. The dragon's wings twitched nervously. Something was about to happen. Suddenly, the room was flooded with blinding light. Virloth staggered back, instinctively shielding the child in its claws. The light was so bright, so intense, that for a moment, the dragon feared it might burn everything in its path. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the light faded. The machine was still there, humming quietly, but something had changed. The atmosphere in the room felt different, charged with an energy that had not been there before. Arender stepped forward, his face pale. It's begun, he whispered. The child is awakening the power inside the machine. The dragon's heart pounded in its chest. Whatever had just happened, it was only the beginning. The child had somehow activated the ancient technology, but what would it mean for the future? Was this the key to saving humanity, or was it the beginning of something far more dangerous? Before Virloth could ponder the question any longer, a distant roar echoed through the caverns. The ships, the ones that had been circling the sky, were nearing. They were coming. The moment of truth had arrived. Whatever secrets the child held, whatever power it was awakening, the dragon knew one thing for certain. The child was no longer just a helpless infant. It was the future, and it was now Virloth's duty, not only to protect it, but to help shape the future it was destined to bring. Arender looked at Virloth, his expression grim. We have no time left. We must prepare for what comes next. Virloth nodded, its wings flexing with anticipation. The dragon had made its choice. It would fight. It would protect. And no matter what, it would not allow the child to fall into the wrong hands. The air in the cavern was heavy with anticipation. Virloth stood tall, its massive form a silent sentinel in the center of the room. The ancient machine hummed softly, as though it were alive, resonating with a power that only the child could awaken. The dragon's sharp eyes flicked between the machine, Arender, and the infant nestled safely in its claws. The future of humanity and the planet itself hung in the balance. The child, now older and stronger, had grown curious about the world around it. Its bright eyes were fixed on the glowing symbols that danced across the walls, its tiny hands reaching toward the energy that filled the room. Virloth could feel the power coursing through the space, a strange and ancient force that seemed to call to the child, drawing them both closer to their destiny. Arender stood beside the machine, his eyes fixed on the infant. "This is it," he whispered, almost to himself. "The child is the key to unlocking what humanity left behind. It is our only hope." Virloth growled softly, its golden eyes flicking to the humanoid. "But is it enough?" The dragon thought. The child had already done more than anyone had ever expected. It had triggered the awakening of the ancient technology. But now the real test was about to begin. In the distance, Virloth could feel the tremors of the approaching ships. The faint hum of their engines could be heard from deep within the caverns, growing louder with each passing second. Time was running out. The ships, those dark, sleek vessels that hovered just above the atmosphere, were closing in on the planet. The power they carried, whatever their intentions, would be a threat too great for anyone to face alone. Arender turned to Virloth, his face tense with concern. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice low but firm. "The machines here, this place, can protect us, but only if we can activate the core. We need the child. The energy of the child is the key to unlocking everything." Virloth nodded, its wings flicking nervously. The child was no longer just an infant to be protected. It was now the last hope of humanity, the key to both salvation and destruction. The dragon's mind raced as it thought of what could happen if the wrong hands gained control of such power. As if in response to the growing tension, the child let out a small, gurgling laugh. Its tiny hands reached toward the glowing symbols, as if it could understand the weight of the moment. The dragon's heart swelled with a sense of protectiveness and pride, but also fear. This child, this tiny human, held the fate of so much more than itself. Virloth knew that nothing could ever be the same again. Whatever came next would change everything. Without warning, the ground beneath their feet rumbled again. But this time, it was different. The vibrations were sharper, more violent, as though something huge was coming from above. The distant sound of engines was now unmistakable. The ships had arrived. "They're here," Arender whispered. His voice shook with both determination and fear. "We can't delay any longer." The dragon's wings spread wide, casting a shadow over the entire chamber. "We fight," Virloth rumbled, its deep voice reverberating through the stone walls. The child's safety was no longer the only priority. The future of the human race and the entire galaxy was at stake. The dragon would not let that future fall into the wrong hands. Arender moved quickly, his fingers working at the controls of the ancient machine. The runes on the walls flickered in time with his movements, lighting up with a growing intensity. As the power in the room built to a near unbearable level, Arender spoke again, his voice strained. "This is it. The child must touch the core." Virloth hesitated, uncertainty flooding its mind. "The child, but they're too young." Arender nodded. "It's the only way. The child is the key. The core will respond to their presence, to their energy. We have no choice." The dragon glanced down at the child, who was still reaching for the glowing symbols, its eyes wide and curious. There was no turning back. With a deep breath, Virloth slowly extended one of its claws, gently lifting the infant and moving toward the glowing core at the center of the chamber. The child, as though it understood the importance of the moment, reached out and placed its tiny hand on the crystal surface of the core. At the instant the child's skin made contact with the ancient device, the room erupted in a brilliant, blinding light. Viraloth recoiled, instinctively protecting the child as the energy surged outward in waves. The air hummed with an intensity that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cavern. The dragon's wings flared, its body trembling with the sheer power that flowed from the machine. Arender shielded his eyes, watching in awe as the light grew brighter and brighter. "It's working," he exclaimed. "The child has activated the core." Viraloth's heart pounded. The energy was overwhelming, yet strangely comforting. It was as though the child was connecting with something deep inside the planet, something ancient and powerful. The dragon's mind was filled with a sense of awe and fear. This was the legacy of humanity, their greatest creation, the technology that had once shaped the universe. And now, the child was awakening it. As the light began to fade, the chamber grew still. The humming of the machine softened, but the air was still thick with the energy that had been released. Viraloth cautiously looked down at the child, who was still resting in its claws. The baby's eyes were wide and filled with wonder, but there was no sign of fear. The dragon could feel the warmth of the child's tiny body, and for the first time, Viraloth truly understood that the child was not just a key to the past. It was a bridge to the future. Suddenly, the sound of engines filled the air again, this time much closer. The ships were descending, their dark forms silhouetted against the light of the setting sun. Viraloth knew they had no more time to wait. The enemy was upon them. "They've come," Arender said, his voice hardening. "We have to act now." Viraloth stepped forward, its claws gripping the ground beneath it. "We will not let them take the child. We will fight." The dragon's massive wings beat with power, sending gusts of wind swirling around the chamber. Arender reached for a small device on his belt and pressed a button. The cavern walls shifted, revealing hidden weapons and armor designed to defend the heart of humanity's legacy. Arender quickly began to arm himself, his eyes flicking between the dragon and the ships outside. "We will protect the child," Arender said, his voice fierce. "No matter what," Viraloth nodded, its golden eyes narrowed with determination. The child had awakened the ancient power, but now they had to protect it from those who would use it for evil. The ships had come to claim the child, to take its power. But Viraloth and Arender would not allow that to happen. The dragon turned, its wings folding tightly to its body as it prepared to fly. The hum of the approaching ships grew louder, the sound of their engines reverberating through the caverns. They were here, and they would stop at nothing to take the child. Viraloth's eyes burned with fury. "Prepare yourself," the dragon growled. "The battle for humanity's future begins now." Arender stood tall beside Viraloth, the child cradled protectively in the dragon's claws. They were ready. The enemy was coming, but they would not stand down. The child would be protected at all costs. The future would not be stolen from them, not today. With a powerful beat of its wings, Viraloth took to the sky, soaring out of the cavern and into the open air. The ships were descending, but they would find the dragon and the child waiting for them, ready to fight for the future of humanity.